So Afghanistan is going gonzo, son. It has been officially taken over by the Taliban. You have the president fleeing the country. Kabul, the main city. Well, other main cities also fell within the last 3 days, but the main city, Kabul, has fallen. And the Taliban just sort of slowly marched in there and made their way to the presidential palace and sat at the former president's desk. So, I mean, it honestly is legendary how quickly Afghanistan fell. And there are some lessons to take away from that, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But first, let me go ahead and show you a Sky News segment on this. Usually when it comes to a lot of foreign policy stuff, I generally like to lean on outlets that are not American because I think they usually do a better job. So here's Sky News piece on what just happened in Afghanistan.
We'd been warned, but this was the first time that we realized something was happening. Gunfire followed by people running. Police vehicles suddenly appearing on the streets that were emptying fast. Within minutes, helicopter gunships appeared over the presidential palace and government buildings in the center of Kabul. Anti-missile systems firing chaff into the air. The Taliban had entered the city and the American pilots knew it. For hours they circled above, but there was nothing they could do to stop the takeover of the capital. Occasional gunfire ripped through the air. Throughout the day, Chinook helicopters ferried United States Embassy staff to the international airport. Road moves deemed far too dangerous. It harked back to the images of the ignominious retreat of the US from Vietnam. An image President Biden said wouldn't be repeated, but this still photograph may well come back to haunt the president in the days to come. In Kabul, crowds gathered to welcome the Taliban. They greeted speakers with enthusiasm.
So if you're going to hear a lot of shouting
near the presidential palace, I watched as the Taliban entered the very heart of this country's government.
I think it's a procession of the Taliban. Yes, it is. There's the white flag, and they're coming down the street just next to us.
Inside the presidential palace, they rammed home this remarkable takeover, posing in the offices of power, a power that after 2 decades of trying has failed to finish them. The tension in Kabul has been at bursting point. As we left our hotel to see what was going on, the Taliban were right in front of us. They stared, but let us pass. It won't be like this for long. These streets are usually heaving with people and cars. They were deserted. Traffic jams are a permanent fixture here, the reason army and police checkpoints. Now, though, we pass through unimpeded. These heavily armed mini-fortresses now unmanned. Once again, the Afghan soldiers have melted away.
We're in just a very short while after the arrival of the Taliban, and news that spread through the city. The streets are really empty. I mean, we were here only a day or so ago, and in the hours from this morning we could see it was absolutely chock-a-block with people. Now it's pretty quiet, pretty empty. A lot of people have just gone home. There's no real sort of authority on the streets anymore.
This population knows what's coming. Some of the changes are subtle. No jeans and t-shirts now. They've changed into traditional shalwar kameez clothing, and there's no women to be seen. And no images of women on beauty salon windows either. Whitewashed, even as the president talked like he was still in charge.
There is a clear need that the National Directorate of Security, alongside the police and Afghan army, take responsibility of the security of all citizens, as per my order to the Defence Minister and the Interior Minister. It is our responsibility, and God willing, we will carry out the responsibility in its best manner.
The president's words of security infer order. At the airport, there wasn't much of that to be seen. There's a mad scramble to get on flights that have been cancelled and onto military flights to which there's no access. The roads clogged with traffic and Afghan military vehicles. moving in all directions, but mainly away from the Taliban. On the roadside, the latest arrivals from battles around the country drag their belongings along the dusty roads, looking for somewhere to stay. None will forget the day the Taliban returned. Their 20-year war is won. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Kabul.
That's a fair summation. The Taliban has won the war in Afghanistan. So the only area that the United States still holds is the airport. So Biden sent in about 5,000 U.S. troops, but only to secure the airport and basically get out the rest of our allies. Well, actually, not even our allies. Get out the rest of the Americans and the people who are employed by the U.S. government and perhaps our contractors as well. You have the biggest failure here, and there are many people who would argue there are a lot of failures, but the biggest failure would probably be the fact that we have interpreters and people who aided the U.S. government along the way. There's about 88,000 allies of the U.S. who are from Afghanistan and in Afghanistan. And we have a really arduous process to get into this country and get through immigration. It's a 14-step process. And as a result of that, as a result of the bureaucracy, fewer than 2,000 people have been let into the United States legally. So 88,000 desperately need our help, and only 2,000 have already been let in. So to the extent you can talk about failures, that's probably the biggest failure, is that there should have been a streamlined process for the people who really depended on us and we depended on them throughout this whole process, that they should be let in. And because this is what they were promised all along. They were effectively promised, hey, if you're an interpreter for us or if you do X, Y, or Z for us, then we'll let you in. And it appears like that's not happening, and a lot of these people are screwed. So I do feel terrible for those people. If I was Biden or if I was in the federal government, I would be trying to actively work on streamlining that process and get as many of these people to safety as possible. Now, as of right now, there has been no fighting. There has been no bloodshed. At some point, it'll probably come, but the Taliban has taken a largely hands-off approach because they know that the government is fleeing. So, in fact, the head of police under Ghani, the former Afghanistan president, they're keeping the same head of police, and the Taliban has already sworn him in. So they're taking some people who were in government positions, and they're saying, you can stay in that position, but now you're just part of the Taliban and working for the Taliban. As you saw there, the airport is hectic, and a lot of people are desperately trying to flee. You heard about some of the rule changes that are already in effect in terms of what's allowed. Now, let's get into some of the amazing facts about this. The United States spent $90 billion with a B to train 300,000 Afghanistan military fighters. 300,000 Afghanistan military fighters. 90 billion. You know how many Taliban there are? About 75,000. This isn't about numbers, and this isn't about training, and this isn't about equipment. This is about a complete and utter lack of will to fight. And the reason why there's a complete and utter lack of will to fight is because Afghanistan is basically a fake country, and it was completely and utterly propped up by the United States of America. And so you have the 75,000 strong Afghanistan, which is a lot weaker than the number of people who were allied with the government, but they have a governing philosophy and they have the will. And so as a result of that, they're easily winning this. In 2019 alone, the United States dropped 7,423 bombs on Afghanistan. And by the way, there were mass civilian casualties with that. I wonder what that money could have went towards. The amount of money it cost to drop 7,423 bombs. The U.S. a number of times lost track of weapons that were in Afghanistan. Well, guess what? Now all of the weapons that were given to the 300,000 person strong Afghanistan military, they're going to go to the Taliban now. So we ended up making the Taliban a lot stronger than it ever would have been simply by our meddling in the country and our attempt to prop up a fake government effectively. That is a devastating thought. And by the way, of course, we built a lot of infrastructure for them that will now be used by the Taliban. The U.S. also built a multi-million-dollar compound in Kandahar that we never once used. That, of course, will go towards Taliban use now. There's plenty of U.S. money for Afghan schools that went to our allied warlords, who we've talked about previously on the show, who had child sex slaves, and the Taliban. Some U.S. troops, we've been in Afghanistan so long, 20 years, that some U.S. troops have actually watched their children go to the exact same war, which is hard to wrap your mind around. Now, let me give you some more information on this. U.S. News had some great numbers laying out the facts here. American service members killed in Afghanistan through April, 2,448. U.S. contractors killed, 3,846. Afghan national military and police, 66,000 killed. Other allied service members, including from other NATO member states, 1,144. Afghan civilians killed, 47,245. Taliban and other opposition fighters, 51,191. Aid workers, 444. Journalists, 72. And let me give you probably the most devastating fact of all here. Estimated amount of direct Afghanistan and Iraq war costs that the United States has debt financed as of 2020. $2 trillion. $2 trillion. Estimated interest costs by 2050. So this is how much the war is going to cost in total because it's paid for with debt. This is how much the war is going to cost in total when you add the interest by 2050. $6.5 trillion. Trillion dollars. So now the question is very obvious. What do we have to show for all this? What do we have to show for the thousands of U.S. service members killed? What do we have to show for the nearly 50,000 Afghani civilians who were killed? What do we have to show for it? What do we have to show for the $2 trillion already spent and $6.5 trillion that will be spent in total? What do we have to show for it? What do we have to show for it? We have nothing to show for it. In fact, the reason we were told we were going into Afghanistan, what were they? Well, they moved the goalposts a number of times. But first and foremost, they said, we got to get Osama bin Laden. This guy attacked us on 9/11. We have to do it. It's the most straightforward thing you could ever imagine. Well, guess what? He's been dead since 2011. 2011. Then they moved the goalposts and said, okay. It's not just about Osama bin Laden. It's about we have to destroy Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Well, guess what? According to our own intelligence, there's less than 100 Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, and that's all the way back as of 2009. 2009. So why are we there? Now, you say, oh, well, maybe the Taliban is going to give refuge to the new boogeyman, ISIS. We reported on this show, because this is what we do. We follow this stuff and talk about it. But the Taliban has been fighting ISIS. When ISIS had their rise to prominence, the Taliban started fighting them. Now, by the way, does that mean, am I saying the Taliban is good? Of course not. But you need to understand the reality on the ground. And you need to understand that, for example, the Taliban is a guerrilla army. That's very different than a global jihadist network, which ultimately wants world domination. The Taliban is a guerrilla army that just has their own national ambitions in their own region of the world. So, of course, they butted heads and they fought. And by the way, the Taliban really did a number on ISIS. They were the better fighting force. So, we have absolutely nothing to show for it. And guess what? Now, as I talk to you guys, you have all of U.S. political media, all of them. Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, everybody you can think of. They're all viciously going after Biden for pulling out and doubling down on that based on what they're saying. You also have every wing of every major party, every wing of the Democrats and every wing of the Republicans also going after Biden. I haven't heard a single word from any of the left flank in Congress. I haven't heard a single word from any of them. Nobody's out there defending what Biden did and explaining how, listen, what other option did we have? And this is where I'm going to pose this to all you. Now, it seems like the conventional wisdom is, well, why did we do this? The Taliban took over. Why did we do this? Why did we do this? We shouldn't have done this. So what's the implication? The implication is you should stay there forever or draw down in a more orderly way that takes longer. Well, they already extended the timeline. So what would your timeline look like? And here's the main takeaway, guys. When you see how fast Afghanistan folded like a cheap lawn chair, there is no timeline and there is no amount of an orderly withdrawal that would have averted this. So as I told you from early on, it doesn't matter if we withdrew in 2005, in 2008, in 2014, in 2016, in 2021, in 2032, in 2048, in 2089. It doesn't matter when we pull out. Afghanistan was always going to become Talibanistan. It was very clearly always going to become Talibanistan. And I think that's obvious when you look at how fast everything imploded. When you look at how fast it went down, what do you think we could have done to avert this? Again, you could say, if you're being honest, you could say, well, we could stay there forever. Okay, but the American people don't agree with you. The American people don't agree with you. And also, as I said, we were told the goals were get Osama bin Laden, check. Get rid of Al-Qaeda, check. So what the hell is left? What's left? Well, we know what's left, and we know, unfortunately, what a lot of this was really about. The military-industrial complex is very powerful. They make a lot of money from war. You know who wants this? There was just an article the other day. It just came out yesterday, actually. They said, oh, but Biden's missteps in Afghanistan. And it said, presented by Lockheed Martin. Are you kidding? That's the definition of conflict of interest. I think this was in Politico. That's the definition of conflict of interest. Who wants to stay in more than Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and Boeing and Honeywell and every single so-called defense contractor you could think of? This is who was steering our foreign policy. It's true. So they make a lot of money. They make money through no bid contracts. And the reason they're in control is because of bribery, legalized bribery. So that's one reason we're there. Another reason we're there is natural resources. Opium in Afghanistan, trillions of dollars of mineral wealth in Afghanistan. In the case of Iraq, oil. So that has a lot to do with it. And then also it's geopolitics. It's the fact that we want to make sure China and Russia stay at bay in our imperialism chessboard, and we want to keep them from having influence in the region. And by the way, mission failed through and through because as we were bombing, they were building shit. And now they're telling Afghanistan, China is, we're going to make you part of the Belt and Road Initiative, and we're going to go in there and build all your infrastructure out, and we're going to become business partners. Now, this is just imperialism by another name and through another form, but it is imperialism. But we looked at it and said, let's bomb our way to world domination and being the world police. They're saying, let's build stuff. Let's build infrastructure. And so now, immediately, they have a lot more control in the region, a region that we consider vital. So in every measurable way, this was a failure. So what I say is, what did people want Biden to do? What did you want Biden to do? Stay there in a half-assed way forever. Stay there forever with boots on the ground in an all-out way. What did you want? Nobody's giving a serious counterproposal. The conventional wisdom serious people are just saying, just not like this. That's their only point, is why you just getting out in the way you got out is not the way to get out, because look, bad things happened. They were going to happen no matter what, whenever you pulled out. So I think it is incredibly disingenuous the way that people are talking about this. Now, by the way, you want to hear a really interesting fact? I find this incredible. So again, it is unanimous. It's across the board. Everybody's going after Biden for what he did, or his so-called allies are staying silent on this, which I would argue, honestly, is the best thing he ever did. Nate Cohn of the New York Times says, one minor note on the fall of Saigon, because that's what everybody's comparing it to. Like, oh my God, look, this is exactly like the fall of Saigon in Vietnam. Hold on. The takeaway from that story was not, we should have stayed in Vietnam forever. So why is everybody pretending like that's the takeaway from the story? He says, one minor note on the fall of Saigon. Whatever embarrassment it may have meant for the United States or the Ford administration, it's not really my recollection that it hurt Ford politically or was an important issue in the 1976 campaign. Ford's approval rating was at its low point before the fall of Saigon, and it was quite a bit higher a month or two after the fall than it was at the time. And a Gallup poll in 1975, just after this, credited getting troops out of Vietnam as being his biggest accomplishment. His biggest accomplishment. So at the time, everybody flips out. Everybody's like, oh my God, this is terrible. We're so embarrassed. How can we mess up this bad? How can we be so stupid? And then a poll comes out afterwards, and in this Gallup, official respected polling outlet, and apparently the American people say, actually, that's his biggest accomplishment. What did I tell you guys recently? There's a poll that came out, and on every area, Biden dropped. In every area. Handling of the economy, handling of coronavirus, you name it. One area where he went up. Afghanistan. The only one where he's above water. And by the way, this is when we already had a lot of propaganda about how this city is falling, and that city is falling, and that city is falling, and this city is falling, and what are we going to do? And that's the media trying to imply, like, get back in, get back in, get back in. We're messing up, we're messing up. And as the cities were falling to the Taliban, you still had Biden's approval rating go up on the issue of Afghanistan. Guys, there's a lie by commission, which is actively lying. And then there's also this thing, lie by omission, which is you can paint a massively misleading picture by just not giving important context and important perspective. And that is everything the media has done to manufacture consent on Afghanistan, and that's everything that they're doing right now. Because when the Afghanistan papers came out not that long ago, what was it? 6 months ago, a year ago, something like that? And what we learned, and actually I have some quotes on this for you. You guys are going to really be blown away by this. I mean, you guys probably already know it because you follow this show and we covered all this stuff. But when the Afghanistan papers came out, they didn't even treat it like a scandal. They didn't even treat it like something to talk about for a full day or 2 days or a week. They was in and out of the news in like an hour or two. And they certainly didn't give all the details. So Crystal actually isolated a lot of this stuff. She went back and looked through some of the Afghanistan paper stuff. This is how they thought it was really going in Afghanistan all along, the entire 20 years. Quote, we didn't have the foggiest notion of what we were undertaking. General Douglas Lute, White House's Afghan war czar under Bush and Obama, didn't have the foggiest notion what we were undertaking. This is about Obama's surge. Quote, it was impossible to create good metrics. We tried using troop numbers trained, violence levels, control of territory, and none of it painted an accurate picture. The metrics were always manipulated for the duration of the war. That's a senior NSC official. If the American people knew the magnitude of this dysfunction, 2,400 lives lost, who will say this was in vain? General Lute. Every data point was altered to present the best possible picture. Surveys, for instance, were totally unreliable but reinforced that everything we were doing was right, and we became a self-licking ice cream cone. That's from Colonel Bob Crowley, senior counterinsurgency advisor. Our biggest single project, sadly and inadvertently, of course, may have been the development of mass corruption. Ryan Crocker's ambassador to Afghanistan under Ryan Crocker, who's the ambassador to Afghanistan under Bush and Obama. So this is just some of the quotes. They admit every step of the way, we don't have a goal, we don't have a mission, we don't know what we're doing, we're just here. It's a total mess. As I've told you guys before, we allied with warlords who had child sex slaves. And then when our military people blew the whistle on our allies' fucking children, you know what happened? They were discharged. So instead of saying, whoa, this is crazy, maybe don't arm them, maybe don't back them up, they said, shh, keep it on the low because we need their support. So those were your options in Afghanistan. And if you take anything away from this segment, it needs to be this. Your options were warlords with child sex slaves, the Taliban, or a deeply corrupt U.S.-backed government, which is completely fake, which is a total puppet government, which has no popular support. So there are no good answers. So we come full circle to, what are we doing there? I told you guys, $90 billion to train 300,000 Afghanistan soldiers. And they ran away the second they heard a Taliban soldier fart to Tajikistan. So you know how much it would cost for free college in this country? About $60 billion. We spent $90 billion training a military that ran away instantaneously. So to look at all this, and your takeaway is, well, obviously we should have just stayed or we should have withdrawn in a more orderly way. It just shows how disconnected from the American people the media is and the parties are, but also how disconnected from the facts they are. From the facts. This whole thing was effectively a scam. Biden is right to get out, and he's right to double down, and he's right if he triples down. Now, by the way, I'm holding my breath. Why am I holding my breath? Because it's been nothing but wall-to-wall criticism of Biden, and so now he's forced to come out and make some sort of statement. Lord only knows what he's going to say. I hope he doesn't say, oh, okay, well, now we're going to go back in because you guys criticized me enough and it's coming from all areas. I really hope Biden holds the line and stands his ground and doubles down and triples down and quadruples down and goes full curmudgeonly grandpa. Because we already wasted $2 trillion. In total, it's going to be $6.5 trillion. Imagine what that money could have went towards. Everybody died in vain in this. It is America's Vietnam. By the way, a poll came out in 2013, I believe it was. The war in Afghanistan is more unpopular than Vietnam was at the height of its unpopularity, and everybody looks at Vietnam as super unpopular. If I remember correctly, it was under a 20% approval rating for the war in Afghanistan. And again, this is what the entire media is implying we should get back in or should have never left. And this is what the two major parties are either flat out saying we should get back in or just not saying anything and not defending the actions of the administration, which should be defended. Which should be defended. This is beyond frustrating because this is the best thing Biden has done, and he's getting more shit on it than anything ever else. Ever. So it's astonishing to watch this unfold. Listen, what else could he have done? My fear was that he was going to stay there and leave the residual forces and we'd always effectively be there and we'd always be dropping bombs and stuff. No, turns out now he's getting out. Because now the Taliban has taken over. So what are you going to do? You can't keep U.S. contractors and stuff there with the Taliban in control of Kabul and Kandahar and Jalalabad and everywhere else. So what are you going to do? You're going to get out. So best thing he could have done. And don't give me this bullshit because this is what's going to happen. Everybody's going to pretend it's this mass delusion. Everybody does this kabuki theater where they're like, oh, but the real reason we were there was for human rights and democracy and freedom and the women. What about the women? Our top ally is Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, women have no rights. In Saudi Arabia, they behead people in the public square for witchcraft and sorcery and adultery, drug smuggling. If you want to talk about women's rights, why don't you address where we actually have sway first with our allies? Why don't you go try to bring about women's rights among our allies first? Why don't you do that? It's not really about women's rights. And it's not really about democracy. We prop up dictators all over the place. Our top allies are dictators or authoritarians or theocrats or a mix or... Obviously. So it's not about human rights. It's not about democracy. It's not about freedom. It's not about justice. It's not about women's rights. And if you believe it is, God, I have a bridge to sell you. And you are just so incredibly naive. But watch. The entire commentary in the media will be about how this makes the U.S. look bad. And what about democracy? And what about the women? And it's just going to be the dumbest conversations you've ever heard in your life. And we're already seeing them. We're already hearing them. We're already seeing them. This is the best thing Biden did. And I hope he stands strong. And listen, I'm curious to see what happens. The propaganda onslaught is overwhelming, and maybe it'll move the poll numbers a little bit. Like maybe Biden's, the view of how Biden's doing on Afghanistan will go down. But I don't know. I think it's possible that generally the same thing that happened with Ford in Vietnam happens with Biden, where it really doesn't hurt him that much. Because I don't know about you guys, but if you talk to anybody who's not poisoned with the DC brain rot, most people tell you, like, what are we fucking doing? Come on, let's just get out. We're done. I don't want to do this anymore. We don't want to waste our money on it anymore. What are we policing an area halfway across the world for? So who knows? But I really hope he stands strong. And I'm gradually morphing into a Biden bro as I see everybody and their mother go after him for the least bad thing he's done. In fact, it's the best thing he's done. This was going to happen. This was going to happen no matter what. So better rip the Band-Aid off quickly. Remember that old trick? You got a Band-Aid on, it's better just rip it off quickly than to slowly but surely do it. And it was already 20 years. What do you want, 21, 22, 30, 48? No. It's time to come home. He brought us home, and it's none of our business. What's going on in that country is none of our business. I feel terrible for all the people there. The only thing I would have changed and the only thing I would have done better is get all of our people out quicker, faster, and you give citizenship to the interpreters and their families who, of course, are going to be brutalized under Taliban rule. Get them out. Outside of that, it is what it is. And perhaps instead of trying to bomb our way to dominance of the world, you could either not look for dominance of the world, or you could have talked to people and made business deals and built stuff instead of just bomb stuff. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.